As some of you know, I did a talk at work last week about what I called epistemic object and stuff, and thinking with stuff. And it was quite good. It was very interesting. I talked about various things. But at the end, people were chatting to me about what I'd offered, and were giving some suggestions. And some people said, "Oh, do you know about Graham Harman?" And because I was a bit nervous, I get quite nervous in those situations, and my brain shuts down. I said, "No, I've never heard of Graham Harman." And of course, I have, because there was a conversation here on YouTube about it a few weeks ago. And in fact, Alma Farag made a good video about Graham Harman, which I liked, and I've looked a bit at his stuff. I hadn't come across it before recently on YouTube, but I had then, and done a bit of reading about it. And he's one of a group of thinkers, broadly calling themselves speculative realists, well, that kind of philosophy, speculative realism, which is really interesting. I'm still just finding out about it, really. But in terms of objects, it's kind of central to that. Object-oriented philosophy is one of the phrases that's used. And what he's talking about, what Graham Harman talks about in that, he says, is that we tend to disregard objects. We tend to do two things with them. We tend to either undermine them or what he calls overmine them. We don't look at the object itself. And really here, just as a little bit of background, he's talking about metaphysics. And by metaphysics, I don't mean anything supernatural, of course. I'm just talking about those processes by which we assign reality to things. You know, what is real, what exists, and what is a figment of our imagination, what's fictional, what's abstract, what's the reality status of certain things, and what do we do when we say something is real? What do we attribute that to? And Graham Harman says that we tend not to, even though on a kind of vernacular level, we tend to think about objects as real. Of course, if we stub our toe on a stone or kick a stone deliberately, then it's undoubtedly real. But then, when we kind of theorize these things, he said, when we try to be philosophical about it, we tend to disregard the object in favor of something else. As I say, what he calls undermining and overmining. So I'm just trying to think into that myself by talking about it, really, because this is one of the ways that I try to understand things. So I've got an object here. This is a stone. Rather nice piece of rock. Look at that. Isn't that great? But undoubtedly an object, and if you kicked that or bumped your toe against that, you'd know about it, all right? If it flew through the air and smacked you in the back of the head, you'd know about it, wouldn't you? So it has a functional reality in day-to-day existence. But when people talk about these things, philosophically, Graham Harman would say, we tend to disregard the object in favour of something else. And you kind of see that. I've heard people say, well, it's not really there. It's because what it really is, people will say, is it's really atoms and molecules and subatomic particles whirling around in space. That's what it really is. Real, the metaphysics of the real, the reality of it is that it's really just all that. And this sense of hardness that I get when I touch it, he says, we might say, is it's not really hard. That's just a product of the forces that make it up. We're appealing to the real by disregarding the object itself and undermining it, trying to find something underneath it, the underpinning forces, the undermining forces, or the undermining structure of it. I'm reminded here of there's a bit in Jon Ronson's book, The Men Who Stared at Goats, but which was also in the film that Jon Ronson I don't know, there's a documentary series and a film, wasn't it, Men Who Stare at Goats? But there's a character in that, a real person, Major Stubblebine, the US Army, who is engaged in a kind of personal project where he's trying to walk through walls for military purposes, because it would be great if troops could walk through walls, he thinks. And the logic for that is, he says, well, a wall isn't really there, he says. A wall is really just made of atoms, and atoms are mostly space, and the human body isn't really there, because the human body is made of atoms, and atoms are mostly space. So what he's doing there, he's undermining the reality of the wall, and the body in favour of a claim for a deeper reality that lies at the subatomic level. And that, he said, Harman would say, that's undermining. Of course, Major Stubblebine famously tries to merge those spaces so he can walk through the wall, and fails monumentally over and over again by disregarding the ontology of the object itself in favour of this other kind of reality which lies, he says, beneath, undermining. But then Graham Harman says we also have a tendency to overmine, which is, I guess it's a philosophical tradition that comes out of people like David Hume, even this, I think, but lots of other places too, which is this, that we tend to see objects, stuff, as collections of larger, more general categories of experience. So, you know, we might say, yes, I'm talking about this rock still, but this is really just a product of its impact on my senses. So it has the property of hardness, a general property that attributes to lots of other things. This wall here is hard, this is hard. You know, there's a whole series of things that are hard. So it's one of those kind of general categories. It has that property. It also has the property of reflecting light in a certain way that gives it a colour. It's slightly green in some places, in the way that my jumper is a little bit green. So it participates in a kind of general category of things that are greenish grey coloured. And you know, it's also permanent and well bounded. So it's, again, that's a category of things which lie over this and a lot of other objects as well. And we might say, well, it doesn't really exist. We can't access the thing in itself, as Kant calls it. We can't get to the thing in itself. All we get to is a set of properties which it shares with lots of other things. So again, we're not getting in. So Harman would say we're not seeing the object. We're not treating the object as philosophically. We're not regarding the objects as the real thing. We're glancing off the object and going upwards and overmining the reality of the object in favour of descriptions just to do with properties, larger descriptions to do with properties. So that's my understanding of overmining and undermining. Undermining, you say, well, this is, yeah, it's kind of real, but what it really is atoms and molecules and space, and that's the real description. Or we might overmine, says, yes, it's a rock, yeah, sure, but if we want to be really technical about it, we'd say it's actually just the appearance on our senses of a range of properties which, you know, adhere to lots of different objects, or form different objects. There's no real object there in those philosophies, which I think is fascinating. I don't know what I'm going to do with that thought yet, but I do like the idea of an ontology, a philosophy which does focus on objects, because objects, this thing here, it's human scale. You know what I mean? I mean, this is, you do bump your toe on this, or if it does smack you on the head, you do know about it. And I quite like a definition of the real, a philosophical definition of the real, as well as a vernacular, commonplace definition of the real. I like the idea of a philosophy of the real which keeps it at the human scale, keeps it close to the body, you know what I mean? Anyway, enough of that. Thank you very much for your patience. Bye.